He used to smile at me like that. Now, he saves that smile for her. Right across from me. At our own dinner table. She leaned in. Called the flowers gorgeous. He laughed and said, "Of course." Rowan made it herself. And just like that they looked like the couple. Not me. It wasn't loud, nothing dramatic, no lipstick on collars, no slammed doors. Just the way her fingers lingered on his glass when she passed it back. The way he poured for her without asking. And that tiny pause when I looked at them and they didn't look back. I used to think I'd fall apart if I ever saw something like that. I didn't. I stayed very still, and I watched. The rest of the table kept talking. Laughing. Passing bread. I don't think anyone else noticed, but I did. Noticed how her laugh landed half a second late like she needed him to hear it. Noticed how he angled his chair just slightly in her direction. How their jokes overlap like people who text too often and forget what's public and what's private. Everett asked her about her latest gala. Faye beamed. Said she'd been so grateful for his help on the press strategy. I wasn't invited to that meeting. Though I planned the entire donor calendar. I excused myself. Said I needed to check on the bread. It wasn't true. But I needed a minute. To let the air hit my skin and settle what I already knew. The kitchen smelled like garlic and thyme. Warm. Familiar. Like a life that hadn't been touched yet. The knife slid through the loaf. Even strokes. Almost meditative. I didn't feel shaky. Not even angry. I felt aware. When I came back, Everett was topping off her wine. His glass was half full. Hers brimming. They both laughed at something. She brushed his arm when he handed her the napkin. And for a second, she looked at him like he was hers, and he didn't stop her. People talk about affairs like they happen in hotel rooms. In secrecy, in shame. Sometimes they happen in full view. Right under your chandelier, on your plates. In your house. I smiled. Took my seat. "Everything okay?" Everett asked. I nodded. Tore a piece of bread. Said nothing. Faye mentioned her husband would be out of town next weekend. Some cardiology conference, she said lightly. Which means I get the house to myself. Everett shifted. Didn't speak. No one else noticed. But again I did. Later that night when everyone had gone, Everett kissed my shoulder. Said that went well. I turned. Met his eyes. Did it? He blinked. Didn't ask what I meant. Which told me everything. That silence, it used to be comfort. Now it was cover. He went to bed early. Said he was tired. Didn't ask if I was coming. I stayed in the kitchen. Alone. Let the house settle. Listened to the quiet. Then I opened my laptop, created a folder. Langston, observation. 01 timestamped the first 3 things I saw. 7:12 p.m. She touched his hand. 7:47 p.m. Gala planning comment. 8:03 p.m. You always know what I like. I didn't write how I felt. Feelings come later. Evidence comes first. Because I don't scream when I'm hurt. I log. I measure. I wait. Some women want answers. I don't. I want clarity. And clarity needs patience. It also needs witnesses. And maybe next time she'll think twice before smiling at another woman's husband across a table she didn't help build. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. Not with people like Everett. Not with men who rehearse the lie before they speak it. Not with women like Faye who smile first and sin later. It starts with shift. Just small things. He started coming home later. Said the OR was backed up. Said a colleague called in sick. Said he was mentoring more residents now. I nodded. I cooked. I stopped waiting at the table. Then the weekends changed. Everett used to guard his Saturdays. They were our ritual. Coffee. Farmer's market. Split a sandwich at the same park bench. Now he said he had paperwork. Said the hospital was short-staffed. Said he just needed a little space. Funny how space started wearing cologne. Funny how work started coming back showered and smiling. Faye texted me a photo one morning. A vase of white lilies. From a donor, she said. They matched the ones you had at dinner, so thoughtful, right? I stared at it. It wasn't just a similar vase. It was the exact same ceramic, handmade by the same artist I'd bought from last fall. Everett had ordered it, I remembered. Said it was too nice to give away. Apparently, he changed his mind. I started writing things down. Not just what I saw, but what I felt. Because a pattern isn't just evidence. It's rhythm. And rhythm doesn't lie. Everett changed his cologne. Said the old one was discontinued. He switched coffee brands. Stopped reading the newspaper. Started humming a song he used to hate. He began dressing sharper on Tuesdays. That used to be our slow night. Now he left the house looking like someone who might bump into someone he wanted to impress. The thing about betrayal is you don't need proof to feel it. You just need quiet long enough to hear yourself stop pretending. I cleaned out the guest bathroom one afternoon. Found a second toothbrush. Not his, not mine. He said he kept it for overnight guests. We haven't had overnight guests in 3 years. I stopped asking questions. Stopped offering to go with him to hospital galas. Faye had started sending group texts. About decor. Guest list. Themes. But every time she typed we, she meant her and Everett. Not the committee, not me. I watched them once at the hospital fundraiser. I stayed by the bar. Let them think I left early. She laughed at something. Touched his wrist. He didn't pull away. And when he glanced toward the entrance, I could see it in his face. Relief. That I wasn't there. That I wouldn't see what he thought he was hiding so well. I stood by the kitchen sink that night watching his car pull into the driveway. He sat inside for nearly 6 minutes. I timed it. 6 minutes to rehearse how to lie like a husband who still loved his wife. I didn't ask how the gala went. He didn't offer. We brushed teeth in silence. He reached for the second towel. I let him. That night, I changed the name of the folder on my laptop. From Langston Observation 01 to Langston Pattern Ongoing. I created tabs. Messages. Schedule inconsistencies. Behavior shifts. Physical changes. Financial flags. Not because I was planning to confront, but because I was done guessing. I needed data. I needed clarity. I needed to see the shape of the thing before I decided what to do with it. When you work with numbers long enough, you stop trusting what people say. You trust what they repeat. And Everett was starting to repeat himself. Right down to the same excuse. The same pause before emergency surgery. The same half smile when I said I love you. I stopped saying it first. He didn't notice. Or maybe he noticed and didn't mind. Either way, the pattern was clear. It didn't need a confrontation. It needed a plan. Some women need an apology. I just needed confirmation. And I was almost there. It started with laundry. Like a lot of betrayals do. I was collecting things from the dryer. His suit jacket was draped over a kitchen chair, which was strange. He always hung it back in the closet. I picked it up. It smelled like cedar and something faintly sweet, not mine. Not his usual cologne either. The pocket was slightly open. Not torn. Just off. Something about the way it bent. I reached inside. Found a folded piece of thick paper. Not a note. Not a business card. A receipt. From a resort in Ojai. 2 nights. Private spa package. Ocean View Suite. $890. Dinner for 2. Champagne. The date 2 weekends ago. The weekend he told me he was at a surgical retreat. I sat down. I didn't shake, didn't cry. I stared at the paper for a full minute. Then I took out my phone. Opened the calendar. That Saturday, he texted me at 7:43 p.m. Said he was exhausted. Said he was eating hospital food. That same night this receipt said table 14, Côte de Boeuf for 2. Chocolate soufflé. Funny. He's allergic to dairy. And he hates soufflé. But Faye, she posted a story 3 months ago. Birthday dinner. Guess what dessert souffle? Extra whipped cream. Same wine. The caption was, "Nothing makes me feel more spoiled." Of course it doesn't. I took a photo of the receipt. Front and back. Logged it into the file. Created a new subfolder, OJI evidence, primary. I didn't put the receipt back in his pocket. I shredded it. Let him wonder when he'd misplaced it. Let him feel what it's like to lose something without knowing when. That night I watched him come home. He walked in, dropped his keys, kissed my cheek. I asked, "How was the retreat?" He said it was fine, long. Boring lectures. Too much fluorescent lighting. I said, "You look tan." He blinked. Shrugged. "Guess we got lucky with some afternoon sun." I smiled. Poured him water. Said nothing. Because now I didn't just know. I had proof. The next morning I checked our credit card statement. He usually handles it, but I had the login. There were small charges that didn't belong. An art gallery in Santa Barbara. 2 entries at a perfume store. Dinner in West Hollywood. He hadn't told me he'd been south at all, said he never left the conference center. He used to be better at hiding things. Or maybe he thought I'd stopped looking. People think betrayal feels like heartbreak. It doesn't. It feels like paperwork. Tiny mistakes. Misaligned dates. Inconsistencies that don't scream. They whisper. And if you're quiet enough, you hear every one of them. I opened our guest room closet. That's where I kept old gift boxes, travel files, receipts. I remembered giving Faye a scarf last Christmas. Everett said he'd deliver it. I found the box. Empty. But inside was something I'd missed. A slip of wrapping paper. Different pattern. Not mine. And on the corner, a faint signature. Just the letter F with a little loop. I knew that handwriting. She'd written me thank you notes before. This wasn't a thank you, it was a trail. That afternoon I pulled up her company's donor records. It was public data, and I still had access from helping with past galas. Her recent sponsors, one, anonymous. Same last 4 digits as our shared foundation card. Everett had access to it. I hadn't used it in months. Now it was helping fund someone else's flowers. Someone else's dinners. Someone else's life. I took a breath. Backed everything up. Then I made a copy on a drive labeled to Bennett. Just in case. I wasn't ready to send it yet, but I was done pretending it wasn't real. That night he asked if I wanted to go out Friday. Said we could use a date night. I looked him in the eye. Actually, I said I might be busy. He nodded a little too quickly. Didn't ask why, didn't press. Of course he didn't. He already had a reservation. Later, I watched him sleep. His face calm, his breath steady. I remembered when I used to trace it with my hand. Now I just counted how many times he'd lied. I wasn't angry, not even sad. I was finally clear. I wasn't imagining things. I just hadn't found the receipt yet. Now I had. And it was only the beginning. I don't know what came first, the anger or the calm. Maybe it was both. After the receipt, everything was no longer a maybe. And I knew that once a man like Everett starts thinking he's clever, he starts getting sloppy. He'd gotten used to being trusted. Used to being believed. And that made him lazy. He didn't realize I had stopped asking questions. Stopped reacting. I wasn't seeking answers anymore. I was collecting facts. 1 week later, he told me he was leaving his car at the hospital overnight. Said he had an emergency shift. I nodded. But I remembered he'd come home midday to change jackets. And I knew that the old blazer was still in his trunk. That's where I placed the recorder. A small voice-activated device no bigger than a lighter. No blinking lights. No sound. Completely undetectable. I'd used this model before back when I handled internal investigations. This time I wasn't using it for work. I was using it for my own marriage. 2 days later, I retrieved it, plugged it in, listened. Most of it was silence. Some background radio. The car door opening and closing. A few phone calls. And then her voice. Faye. Light, casual, almost laughing. Don't worry, she said. She's too smart to suspect. She's always 2 steps ahead, but not about this. Silence. Then Everett responded. Rowan notices everything. But she trusts too easily. That's her weakness. I stopped the recording, and I laughed. Truly laughed for the first time in weeks. Not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. They thought I didn't know. They thought I was too loving to be suspicious. Too loyal to verify. They underestimated me. I replayed it. Clipped that section. Saved it. Labeled it confirmation, primary. I didn't need to hear it again. But I wanted to. Not out of pain, but clarity. I needed to remember how they sounded when they thought no one else was listening. The way they said my name. Not with guilt, not even hesitation. Just strategy. That was the moment I realized I wasn't part of his life anymore. Not really. I wasn't a person to him, I was a variable. A piece of the equation he had to manage quietly. Not a wife. Just a problem he thought he could outsmart. That night, Everett came home late. I was folding towels in the den. He said the surgery went long. I nodded. Didn't ask questions, didn't push. I handed him a cup of tea. Chamomile. No sugar, just like always. He thanked me. Didn't notice anything was different. Because when someone's lying to you, they're usually too focused on their own performance to notice you've stopped believing it. After he went to bed, I uploaded the voice note to my private email. Backed it up to an encrypted drive. Didn't label it obviously, didn't leave any trace. I changed the password on my laptop, and for the first time in months I slept without waking up. Because now I knew I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't insecure, I was right. And they were sloppy. They really thought I was blind. I really wasn't. You don't plan a dinner party to make memories, you plan it to make sure no one forgets what happens at your table. I started with the menu, nothing too rich. Nothing too bold. Familiar comfort food. Soothing, homey. Things that made people feel safe. It's easier to tell the truth when you think you're safe. I set the date for 3 weeks out. A Friday. Just far enough for no one to be suspicious. Just close enough that Everett wouldn't have time to plan another lie. I texted Faye first. We should do a small dinner soon, I wrote. Just you, Everett, and a few friends. Something cozy before the season gets too busy. She replied right away. Of course, she said. I've missed our little nights in. Her response made me smile. I could almost hear her tapping it out sitting in her office thinking she was in control. I added Bennett to the list. Faye's husband. It had been months since he'd come to our house. He was always traveling, she said. Always out of town. This time I sent the invitation straight to his work email. Made it official. No way for her to intercept, no way to edit the guest list. He replied within an hour. Said he'd be there. Said it was nice to be included. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I picked 2 other couples. Not too close. Not too distant. Just enough to fill the room to witness whatever happened without being invested. People who knew us well enough to believe what they saw. I printed place cards, hand-lettered. Arranged them on the table 3 separate times before I was satisfied. Everett and Faye were seated next to each other but not touching. A respectable gap. I put myself between Bennett and Everett. Faye across from me. I wanted her to look me in the eye. Every detail had to feel natural. Every choice had to look like tradition. I called the caterer. No, I'd handle dessert myself. Something sweet, soft, and simple. I checked the wine. Ordered extra. People talk more when their glass is full. I walked through the house late at night imagining where people would stand, where the laughter would rise, where the silence would fall. I placed the extra iPad quietly on the sideboard. Loaded a slideshow of family memories. No one would suspect a thing. Until it was time. I cleaned the guest bathroom. swapped out the towels for the nice ones, checked every mirror for fingerprints, made sure nothing was out of place. Every inch of that house belonged to me, and I wanted them to remember it. I chose flowers for the centerpiece. Not lilies, Faye's favorite, not roses, Everett's habit. I picked eucalyptus and sea glass, the kind of green that reminds you how cold the ocean can get. When everything was ready, I sent one last email to Bennett. "Looking forward to seeing you," I wrote. "Let me know if there's anything special you'd like for dinner." He replied, "Just something honest." That line stayed with me all week. I watched Everett as the days ticked down. He was restless, more careful than before, but I could tell he didn't suspect a thing. Neither did Faye. She texted me pictures of menu ideas, sent me a playlist for background music, signed every message with a heart. I didn't reply to most of them. I was done pretending. The night before the dinner, I stood in the empty dining room and listened to the quiet. I could almost hear the truth shifting beneath the floorboards. Almost. The table was set. Every seat, every glass. All I had to do was wait for the truth to walk in. 48 hours before the dinner, everything became sharper. Even the air felt thinner. The ocean looked different, colder through the windows. I made a checklist, wrote it out by hand, and stuck it to the refrigerator. Every box I ticked off, I felt more certain. I gathered every piece of evidence I'd collected. The photos, the receipts, the voice recording, the calendar screenshots. I copied them onto a single iPad hidden in a plain black case. Everything was organized by date. Labeled, numbered, impossible to argue with. I didn't want to humiliate anyone. But I wasn't going to protect liars either. That night, Everett came home late again. He didn't kiss me hello. He barely looked at me. He set his bag down in the hallway and disappeared into his office. I watched him through the doorway. He was reading something on his phone, smiling. I wondered if he knew I was done pretending. I wondered if he cared. I went upstairs and ran a bath. Let the water go hot as I could stand it. Closed my eyes and listened to the silence. I thought about how many times I'd given him the benefit of the doubt. How many stories I'd accepted just to keep the peace. How often I'd made myself small. Not anymore. I wrote out a speech for the dinner. Nothing dramatic. Just a few words about gratitude and new beginnings. But I left a space right in the middle for the moment I would play the video. I pictured their faces. Not with anger, not even revenge. Just stillness. They would see me finally not as the background, but as the person who set the table and told the truth. I called my lawyer and confirmed my account passwords, changed the locks on the storage unit, moved a file of important documents into a locked drawer at work. I emailed Bennett a short message. Just a time and a place. No subject line. He replied, "I'll be there, no more questions." I double-checked every camera in the house. Not for security, but so I could remember what it looked like the last time I let liars sit at my table. The day before the dinner, I met Faye for coffee. She hugged me tightly, too tightly, told me how grateful she was for our friendship. She asked what she could bring to the dinner. "Just yourself," I said. She smiled, squeezed my hand. I watched her leave, her silhouette framed by sunlight, her steps light. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That night, I set the table again. Polished every glass, folded every napkin. My reflection in the window looked unfamiliar. Not angry. Not sad. Just done. I went to bed early, slept hard, woke before sunrise. I made breakfast, watched Everett as he rushed through the kitchen, told him to have a good day. He kissed my cheek, distracted, said he loved me. It didn't sting anymore. Because I knew what I was about to do. And I wasn't afraid. The stage was set. Every piece in place. No more waiting. The night started soft. Everyone arrived right on time. People smiled at the front door, stepped out of their coats, commented on the ocean air and the sound of waves through the open window. The smell of lemon and thyme drifted from the kitchen just the way I wanted. I watched Everett shake Bennett's hand. Their voices were polite, but I could hear the tension, the careful pause between words, the way Everett looked down just a little too long. Faye came in last. She wore navy blue simple earrings, the same perfume she wore the first night we met. She hugged me, told me how lovely everything looked. Her voice was light, but she couldn't meet my eyes. We moved into the dining room. Candles flickered on the sideboard, the flowers in the center smelled sharp clean. I poured the wine. I filled every glass myself. Everyone thanked me except Everett. He was distracted, eyes darting between his phone and the table. We made small talk. Weather hospital news, a new restaurant opening up the road. I asked Bennett about his recent trip to Vancouver. He smiled, told a story about getting lost in Stanley Park. Everyone laughed. Even Faye. It felt almost normal. Except I could see it, the way Everett's knee bounced under the table, the way Faye checked her watch when she thought no one was looking, the way their sentences folded in on themselves, never quite meeting. Dinner arrived simple and warm. Chicken and vegetables, a salad with apples and walnuts, nothing showy. I let the conversation wander. I asked questions and watched people talk. It's easy to hide in a group, but you can't hide from yourself. Midway through the main course, I saw Everett's hand tremble as he reached for his glass. I saw the flicker of worry on Faye's face as she caught his eye. I let them stew. I waited for dessert. I cleared the plates myself, let the clatter fill the quiet. No one offered to help. I brought out the cake. Set it in the center, handed out plates. Before anyone could dig in, I stood. I took a breath. I looked at each person in turn. "Thank you for coming tonight," I said. "It means a lot to have friends here, especially when so much of life feels uncertain." Everett looked up surprised. Faye set down her fork. I smiled, gentle, steady. "I want to share something before we finish. Just a few memories, a little tribute to the people who've made this house a home." I walked to the sideboard, pressed play on the iPad. The screen behind me flickered to life. At first it was just photos. Holidays, birthdays, blurry snapshots from the backyard. Laughter, arms around shoulders, old jokes. Everyone relaxed. Then a photo of Everett at the Ojai resort. At the table for two. Faye beside him, smiling at the camera. People froze. I didn't say a word. Another photo, Everett and Faye leaving the hotel together, her hand on his arm. Silence stretched. Then the audio. Just a few seconds. Faye's voice, gentle, amused. "She's too smart to suspect. She's always 2 steps ahead, but not about this." Everett's voice, soft and certain. "Rowan notices everything. But she trusts too easily. That's her weakness." The sound faded. No one breathed. Bennett was the first to move. He looked at Faye. His face said everything he couldn't. Faye covered her mouth with her hand, eyes shining, but no tears. Everett stared at the table, his shoulders slumped like someone who'd been holding up the ceiling for too long. I stood still. I let the silence stretch. I wanted everyone to feel it. No one rushed to fill the space. Finally, Bennett spoke. "How long?" Faye tried to speak, then stopped. Everett cleared his throat. He looked at me, pleading, but I didn't look away. "How long?" Bennett repeated. "A year," Everett whispered. "Maybe more." One of the other guests, pushed their chair back, the sound loud in the quiet. I looked at Faye. Was it worth it? She shook her head, a tiny broken motion. I turned to Everett. "Why?" He stared at the wall, couldn't answer. Someone cried quietly. "Not me." Bennett stood, his napkin falling to the floor. He looked at me. "Thank you, Rowan." His voice was soft, steady, the voice of a man who knew something true was better than any comfort. He left the room, walked out into the hallway. Faye followed, stumbling, apologizing. The other guests started to rise. No one said goodbye. Everett just sat there. Staring at the empty space where Bennett had been, I sat down. "It's done," I said. He started to speak, but I shook my head. "Don't. There's nothing left to say." He put his head in his hands. I waited. The house was quiet now, just the sound of the waves and the clock in the hall. When everyone had gone, I stood, cleared the table, washed every plate. Everett stayed at the table, silent, unmoving. I went upstairs, packed a suitcase, and left it by the front door. I sat on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the ocean. I thought I would feel relief. I didn't. I felt clarity. Like ice water in my veins, I watched the moon rise, watched the clouds drift. When I finally went inside, Everett was asleep on the couch. I left him there. Tomorrow the real work would begin. But tonight I had told the truth. I had finished the story no one else wanted to hear. And the world for once was exactly as I saw it. The dinner was over. But nothing was finished. The day after the dinner, I woke before sunrise. The house was silent except for the refrigerator's hum and the distant roll of waves. I poured myself coffee, sat at the kitchen counter, and listened to my own breath. For the first time in months, my hands didn't shake. Everett came downstairs, eyes swollen, shoulders slumped. He tried to speak. I didn't answer. I wasn't interested in another story. He left the house without saying goodbye. I packed his suitcase for him, just the essentials, nothing more. I left it by the door. By noon he was gone. I changed the locks that afternoon. Bennett called me the next day. He asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. We sat at a corner table, neither of us looking at each other for a long time. He said he had already called a lawyer. He said he didn't blame me or himself, or even Faye, not yet. He thanked me for telling the truth, for not letting the lie keep growing in the dark. His voice was tired but honest. He asked if I'd known for long. I told him the truth. Long enough to lose my anger. Long enough to choose clarity over vengeance. He nodded. He said that was all he needed to hear. We didn't talk about forgiveness. Not that day. News of the dinner spread fast. That's the thing about a perfect dinner party. People always remember what happened, especially when they wish they could forget. By the end of the week, our mutual friends started texting. Some asked if I was okay. Some didn't know what to say. Some just stopped talking altogether. I answered only the ones who asked simple human questions. I didn't owe anyone explanations. At the hospital, word traveled even faster. Doctors and nurses looked at Everett differently now. His chief asked him to take leave. The administration opened an internal investigation. No one said the word affair out loud, but it hung in the air, heavy and sticky. Everett packed his things and moved into a rented apartment across town. He left me a note on the kitchen counter. It just said, "I'm sorry for everything." I threw it away without reading the rest. Faye quit her job at the foundation. She called once, left a message. Her voice was unsteady, full of words that used to move me, but I didn't call back. I heard through a friend she'd left Bennett and was staying with her sister up north. Bennett's lawyer called mine. Divorce papers moved through the system, neat and efficient. Everett tried to call a few times. He stopped after the fourth. The first week felt like living underwater. Every sound was muffled. Every day stretched into the next. I let myself rest. I let myself sleep. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I took walks by the ocean at dawn. Sometimes the air was so cold it made my lungs ache. I liked that feeling. It reminded me I was still here. I made new passwords for every account. I went through every old file, every photo, every forgotten drawer. I threw away everything that didn't belong to me. I changed my name on the mailbox back to Whitlock. I called my lawyer and started the process of separating the house, the accounts, the last legal pieces of what we'd built. I called my mother, told her the truth. She asked if I was okay. I said yes, because by then I was. Work was quiet but steady. No one asked questions I didn't want to answer. One evening, Bennett dropped off a small envelope at my door. Inside was a simple note. "Thank you," it read, "for not letting me stay in the dark." I left it on the counter for weeks, not sure if I wanted to read it again or throw it away. I didn't hear from Faye after that. I started sleeping through the night. I started buying groceries for one. Some nights I watched the sun set from the back porch and let myself feel nothing. Other nights I let myself feel everything. Grief is not a hurricane. It is a slow tide coming in and out, washing the sand clean, one layer at a time. I didn't cry often, but sometimes I did. I forgave myself for that. The hospital called a month later. They asked if I would speak with someone about what happened. I said I'd rather not. I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in moving on. The day my divorce was finalized, I stood in the middle of the living room and let the silence settle over me like a warm blanket. I didn't celebrate. I didn't mourn. I just breathed. My house felt bigger, emptier, but also more honest. I gave away half the furniture. Donated Everett's books. Gave Faye's forgotten scarf to Goodwill. I bought new sheets, new towels, things that only I would use. Sometimes at the market someone would ask about Everett. I just smiled and said, "We're both doing fine." It was true in its own way. I started seeing a therapist. She didn't ask me to explain myself. She asked what I wanted. I told her I want my life to feel like mine. She said, "That's a good place to start." I made a habit of writing down 3 small things each day that made me feel whole. Fresh coffee, sea air, a phone call with my mother. Slowly the list grew. I found a rhythm again. One night, weeks after the dinner, Bennett emailed me a photo. It was of the ocean, gray and still taken from a beach I recognized. No words. Just the image. I replied with a single line. "Thank you for seeing the truth too." I didn't know what would happen next. I only knew I was ready for it. The fallout was almost over. But my life was just beginning again. It's quiet here now. Some mornings I wake before sunrise and walk barefoot to the edge of the sand, coffee warming my hands. The tide is low and the beach is empty except for a few gulls picking at seaweed and the soft hush of the waves. I never realized how much noise I was carrying inside until it was gone. There are days when I miss the old routine. The clatter of Everett's keys on the counter, the hum of the shower, the way he'd always leave half a cup of coffee behind. Sometimes I catch myself setting out 2 plates for breakfast. Old habits fade slowly. I let them. My mother calls every Sunday now. She doesn't ask about Everett. She asks what I'm reading, what the ocean looks like, if I'm sleeping through the night. I tell her the truth. Most nights, yes. I tell her I'm okay. And I mean it. I started swimming again. Not far, just enough to feel the shock of cold water, the ache in my arms, the world going silent beneath the surface. There's something about being underwater that makes everything else blur. All the stories, the questions, the memories, they fall away, replaced by the simple thump of my heart, the burn in my lungs, the promise of air when I reach for it. Some afternoons I sit on the back porch with a notebook and write down every question I used to ask myself. Why did he do it? Was I not enough? When did it start? Did he ever love me? I write them all down and then I close the notebook and leave it on the table. The ocean doesn't care about questions. The ocean just moves. I donated the last of Everett's things a month ago. The old sweater, the stack of medical journals, a half-used bottle of his cologne. I kept a single photograph, one from our first year in the house before any of the cracks showed. We look happy. Maybe we were. Maybe that's enough. Work is steady. My team asks less and less about what happened. Some people drifted away, some became closer. There's a new intern who makes me laugh at meetings. I remember what it feels like to enjoy small talk, to let myself be seen again. I started baking bread on Sundays. It makes the house smell warm, full, alive. Sometimes I eat it standing over the sink, tearing pieces, with my hands, butter melting onto my fingers. It feels good to feed myself, to take care of something simple. Bennett sends photos from his hikes, quiet streams, sunlit leaves, the slow return of spring. He never asks questions, just shares what he sees. I reply in the same way, a photo of the ocean at dawn, a line from a book I liked, the glow of city lights at night. We don't need to talk about the past. We both know what it cost. Faye never reached out again. Sometimes I wonder where she is, if she found peace or just another story to tell herself. But mostly I don't think about her. Or Everett. Their names are just part of the history of this place, like old paint on the walls, faded and forgotten. I let the past settle. It's not forgiveness. It's not even forgetting. It's just putting down what I no longer need to carry. I have dinner with friends sometimes. We laugh, share stories, pour wine, sit outside until the sun disappears. I tell them I'm happy. They believe me. I believe me too. Therapy is slow but honest. Some weeks I have nothing to say. Other weeks, everything comes out in a rush. My therapist says I don't have to make sense of it all. I just have to let myself live the questions and trust that the answers will come when they're ready or not at all. Sometimes on the coldest mornings, I wrap myself in a blanket and watch the sky change from gray to blue. I listen to the world waking up, the mail truck in the street, the neighbor's dog, the distant clang of a bell from the harbor. Life goes on. Quietly, steadily, beautifully ordinary. I started a new project at work. A report on patterns of financial trust and what happens when that trust is broken. It feels fitting. I'm good at following patterns, at finding the moment where the story changed. This time I write not to expose someone but to help others find their own clarity. I joined a book club. I go for long walks. I stopped waiting for an apology that was never going to come. I stopped explaining myself. The ocean doesn't ask for explanations. It just accepts what it's given and keeps moving. One night, months after everything ended, I stood at the water's edge while the sky turned purple and gold. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd lived: Everett's wife, Faye's friend, the person who needed proof, the person who needed closure. I realized I didn't need anyone to name me, to forgive me, to fix what had happened. I just needed this salt air, open sky, my own quiet company. Some people think healing is loud, dramatic, a declaration. For me, it's 1,000 small choices. Letting myself rest, letting myself laugh, letting myself stay. I kept the house, not because I wanted to hold on, but because I was tired of running. It's mine now. Every window, every creak in the floorboards, every sunrise through salt-streaked glass. If I'm honest, I don't know what comes next, and for the first time, that feels like a gift. Tonight, I'll leave the windows open. I'll listen to the waves and the wind and the world turning quietly on. I'll breathe in, breathe out. I don't need answers. I don't need anything but this. I didn't lose my life in that dinner party. I just lost the version of myself who needed to be chosen, who needed to be kept. And I found someone better, a woman who knows that the ocean doesn't ask questions. It just lets you begin again. The house is quiet now, and so am I. I don't need answers or apologies or anyone to choose me. I have my own life back. That's enough. If you were in my place, would you have exposed the truth or walked away in silence? Tell me what you would do. I'm listening.